There's now a way to contact the Wolf Connection podcast. Send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calfo. Let's talk about some wolves. All the international guests keep pouring in, and I am extremely excited. I'm flying solo today. Stephen is not with me, but a very interesting individual and continuing the study of international wolves and how they're impacting these communities. I have Hanna Pettersson with me. She's originally from Sweden. She is a fourth-year PhD researcher, currently in Leeds in the UK, and trying to get all of her papers finally published and things of that sort. So she's doing a lot of work and it's at night in Leeds, so I don't want to keep her too long. But Hanna, thank you so much for coming on and being available.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And your studies were sent to me, or I was highlighted by Barbara Marty and Vicente Palacios. And it seems like you guys have had a good working relationship, and there's been a lot of cross sections of where this research has gone. So just give everybody a background of how in Sweden you got involved with wanting to study wolves, or you went down this track. You have a master's in biodiversity, conservation and management. You have a bachelor's in environmental science. So you're in this space. What led you to wolves and wanting to study their impact?
Yeah, it's a good starting question, isn't it? And I think like so many other people, my path has been winding. You may have seen that I started off in doing global studies, so focusing on global problems and global solutions, and eventually, or little by little, coming to the conclusion that the loss of biodiversity, this global crisis that we are living right now, is what I wanted to dedicate myself to. I'm a social scientist, so this means that I work on people, trying to understand what we can do together to make this better, because this is a people problem, not a nature problem. And also, of course, a people solution, right? And I started out researching rewilding more broadly. How can we build legitimacy or acceptance to restore nature? And this is because people have very different perceptions, right, about what nature should look like. What is even nature? That word, what does it mean? So that's how I started out. And then stumbling upon this PhD project that I'm doing right now, actually. I've always been interested in large carnivores. They're amazing, impressive animals. And this PhD project was brought to my attention, and it basically had the title, The Future of Human Carnivore Coexistence in Europe. And if you're like me, interested in people and management and how to find solutions, well, why not start with the hardest, which is wolves, right? Because wolves are so amazingly adaptable and intelligent, and they mean so much to so many people. So if we can crack this, we can pretty much crack anything, I think. So I shaped my project to research wolves, and I ended up in Spain because I happen to speak Spanish, and it's a very interesting case study because, as you spoke about with Vicente and Barbara, they are expanding in Spain. They have a very large population of wolves there, which most people don't know, actually. Even in Europe, most people are very surprised at the fact that Spain has way more wolves than Sweden does. We only have about 350 in Sweden, and we keep them low. And Spain has somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000, right? And at the same time, there are more people there. They have more kind of free-ranging, free-roaming livestock. So yeah, as a social scientist, it's a very interesting place to be because there are so many kind of intersections of tradition, of nature restoration, of depopulation, and well, pretty interesting stuff, really.
You've said so many wonderfully pointed things in just your first answer there, and I find that incredible that you're studying the global aspect of this, because I think you're right. Many people don't think that, and I wouldn't have thought of initially that Spain had this really flourishing population and expanding population of wolves that seems to have this cross section with the human population. And I did not know that Sweden only had a couple of hundred or 350 wolves. I wasn't aware that that was the numbers and how low they were. So when you're in this, because I read one of the articles that you had, and the first three paragraphs are really set the stage for this. So you went to three different types of communities. So one that already had the permanent presence of wolves, one where they have returned, and where you see the next decade that there is going to be an impact there. So as you said, with the people issue of it, what was your approach in each of these communities to talk about with the human population, the impacts that the wolves are having, and how to prepare the next community for when they do eventually start to crop up and repopulate?
Exactly. That's a good question, because the focus, it's important to mention, the focus of my work is on coexistence and not on conflict. We know a lot about conflict already. We know, there's always more to find out, of course, but we know a lot about why wolves stir up these emotions and these problems, which are real, but also sometimes perceived and not so real. So I wanted to understand what we can learn from places that in some way or other are more harmonious than others, right? Because wolves are expanding across Europe, which is an amazing, impressive fact. They're coming back to Denmark, to Belgium, all these places. Yet we haven't really prepared people. So by doing this approach that you just mentioned, I wanted to trace the process of wolves coming back. What can we learn from each step? So what I wanted to find out in each place was, beginning with the place where wolves have always been around, why is it working a bit better there? What is it that makes living with wolves here a little bit easier than it seems in other places? And where they have returned, what is it that is working or not working, and how has the process been? And in the place where they will come back, what is it that they believe and hope and fear and need in order to deal with this better, right? And I'm a social scientist, as we've talked about. So what I do is basically communicate with people, talk to people. And here, I'm sure you've talked, and I've seen you've talked to people doing human dimension stuff, looking at surveys and attitudes and things like that, which is great and important in order to answer how many people think a certain thing. But I wanted to understand why. And in order to really understand why, you need to let people speak kind of on their own terms. And you need to, well, for me, it was very important to understand how the system works, because the wolf is so much broader, right, than the animal. It's about what is going on in a particular place and how that impacts people and how those issues are connected or not to wolves, right? So what I did was basically what you do in Spain is you find the closest bar because I didn't know anyone, right? I came from the UK, and it's very important to build trust and to get to know people and to find the right gatekeepers, if you will. So it was rather interesting because these are small communities. The first one I started had about 70 inhabitants. And so this Swedish woman from nowhere popped up into the local bar with all the old dudes playing cards and started, hanging out, asking questions. And then one thing leads to another. Fortunately, people were very open and collaborative and helped me a lot. So this work, it's important to say, is built thanks to these amazing people that have helped me along the way and gone out of their way to give me advice about who to talk to and what to look at and such things. So a typical interview would be sitting down somewhere and basically asking people how is to live here? What are the main issues? What are the main tendencies? And if people brought up wolves in the beginning, that told me something. If they didn't, it told me something else, right? So if they hadn't brought up wolves until, the end of the interviews. I would then ask them, so, I mean, there are wolves here. What do you think about that? And I think that was important to kind of give me an idea about what is it that is impacting people's lives and how does that relate to wolves. Yeah, and I can go on, but maybe you should give me specific questions. Otherwise, I'll ramble until tomorrow.
No, I love it. No, I love I love the long-windedness of it, because it's like you had stated before, this is a societal, social issue. What were some of the things that you found for those that really told you right off the bat about wolves, as opposed to those who left it to sort of the end of your questioning? What was the general idea that you got in a lot of these communities about their feelings about wolves? Because we have heard multiple times through our interviews and through just speaking in general that the wolf in Europe really had a tumultuous time in the last 500 to 600 years. And the fact that they are repopulating is a positive aspect. So what's the gauge that you got from the community members for the most part, and how they felt about wolves living on the landscape or possibly coming back?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of perhaps pick apart your question a little bit. First of all, positive aspects, when wolves are coming back, it's not a straightforward yes, and I would say it depends on so many things, right? For some people, it is negative because, however you turn around the issue, it is more difficult to live with wolves if you have free roaming livestock, and so it's perhaps hard to put it as a positive thing for people living with free roaming livestock, but wolves, as we all know, are very important within nature. It's unclear exactly what role they have in an ecosystem in Europe, right? So that's maybe one difficulty. A lot of people will say, well, wolves are great for ecosystem services, maybe make a reference to Yellowstone, but we have to remember that this is a very humanized system we're talking about. There is nothing, completely self-managing about most of these places, right? Because people are hunting there, they're farming there, they're living there. So it's kind of difficult to pick these effects apart. But anyway, to get to your question, I did have to, obviously, people knew I was looking at wolves. So a lot of people would bring it up, right? And one of the aspects in my first community where wolves have always been around, the people that brought it up in the beginning would be often, for example, people working within tourism, because this was a place where tourism is very, very important. And it's perhaps one of the reasons why it's working rather well in this area. So just to kind of give you a short overview, or give the listeners a short overview of this first area I'm going to refer to now. It's a place where wolves have always been around, but in the last kind of 3 decades or so, tourism has started to increase quite significantly, and it's thanks to the wolf. And it's really impactful in this community because depopulating, there's not that much else going on there. It's beautiful and all, but there are more kind of scenic, attractive places in Spain. So the wolves, well, everybody can see that it brings income to the communities. So, for example, some local mayors were really talking with a lot of hope and excitement about wolf tourism because it filled up local hostels and, added some business opportunities and so on and so forth. So that would come up pretty quickly in those conversations. Interestingly, speaking to farmers and shepherds, it would often not come up at first, or unless they knew what I wanted to talk about and would bring it up more quickly. But like so many other places in Spain, when I asked them about their challenges, they would talk about the extremely low profitability, the very unfair market conditions, the difficulties with the administration, the bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. They really, really have a hard time in so many ways. And that's, I think, a very important insight in my work about this first community, is that if we don't help these communities, which are doing an amazing job of farming. It's some of the most sustainable farming out there. It's small scale, shepherds looking after their flock of sheep, raising amazingly biodiverse landscape and maintaining it free from shrub and so on, which is now with climate change burning ever more intensely. If we don't help them to do well, who then will be able to live with wolves, right? If communities like those disappear, who are living well with wolves, nobody else will be able to. So I think that's something I really want to emphasize with my work, is that we, in some way, we should flip the script a little bit and really focus on boosting the communities that are living well with wolves, making sure that they have really good conditions, that their work is acknowledged. So that's really important. And that was also something that came up a lot in the interviews, that people, farmers, shepherds, felt that nobody sees them, nobody acknowledges them, and often actually saying that we are sustaining the wolf here, but it's not giving us any benefits. The money from tourism, for example, goes to other pockets than theirs, and so on. But it is an interesting place. It's called Sierra de la Culebra, this place where I worked, and it's the most favorable place to spot wolves in Spain, I would say, because the topography is very favorable. It's there's a lot of open spaces, so it's easy to see wolves there, which is why tourism works. There's a lot of other places in Spain where tourism is completely unviable, because simply the chances of seeing them is so low, or it's in the middle of some random cornfield or whatever. So tourism isn't viable across Spain, but here it is, and it works really well. So this is why I really want to emphasize this place, because it should be kind of boosted in all ways possible, to have a really good example to look at and learn from. And it's definitely not kind of a blueprint for how other places will work or should work, because of the unique conditions. But if you want to watch wolves in Spain, this is definitely where you should go.
So when we're talking about these societal challenges and changes, because I'm sure you've done your research and you know about the conflicts that happen in the United States in the western part of, the success stories about Yellowstone and Idaho and all those places, but also the conflicts that happen there. There are a lot of individuals, or a good portion of individuals, who are working with farmers, at least stateside, to figure out these coexistence measures and make sure, as you're stating here, to have the recognition that there are farmers and cattle ranchers and individuals that are able to coexist with wolves in the landscape where there's very little to no depredation of their cattle or their livestock, and how their livelihood is impacted there. So are there any proposals? As you said before, those tourism dollars are clearly going to certain pockets of the economy. Is there any thought in Spain or in other places, as they see wolves starting to expand and starting to repopulate, that these places, these farmers and cattle ranchers get at least the spoken recognition? Because we all know how much voices need to be heard, and everyone needs to have a voice in the conversation. Otherwise, this doesn't work, as you've clearly stated here in your research and the articles that I've read. And for them to funnel some of that money towards the communities that are able to make that coexistence work, is there anything going on there in those two facets?
I mean, I should say that tourism money is, of course, on a more broad level benefiting the community, right? Because it makes it a bit more alive. There are more people coming there. So that's, of course, beneficial also to farmers and shepherds. But yes, it is an important question. How can we share and redistribute to some extent costs and benefits of wolves, of large carnivores? This is the $1 million question, right? Because the main problem with large carnivores and so much other wildlife is that the costs and the benefits, or the good things and the bad things, however you want to put it, really is often unequal, carried much more by local communities who unfortunately also happen to be often very marginalized, at least in the case of Spain, and facing a lot of other challenges, as I mentioned before, with prices and other things, right? So in Spain, of course, like in many other countries, they're doing compensation schemes, which I must say work really badly. It takes forever to get paid. If they even do get paid, then it's a smidgen of what they're worth. And it's actually more an insult to the injury, I would say, oftentimes, because people have close relationships with, or I mean, they love and care for their animals, who often have a particular role within the flock and so on and so forth. So compensation doesn't help, and it definitely doesn't solve the problem, right? The problem is that livestock get killed. And there's been some talk about supporting communities with, for example, certification. They have worked that out in some locations. I give an example within my research in the second case study site, which I haven't mentioned so much yet, of a really good, interesting example where an NGO managed to establish a good collaboration with local supermarkets to actually provide real monetary benefits to livestock shepherds who are farming in a way that's compatible with large carnivores and other animals, right? So that's something. But of course, certification is kind of built on exclusivity to some extent, right? This is a type of meat that it's more expensive. It is kind of marketed as unique and high quality. So that's not something you can cram out across Spain, because then the prices would drop and it wouldn't be special anymore, right? And in Spain, there's been a little bit of talk about kind of, well, not perhaps so much on administrative level, but at least among local groups, about whether or not it would be possible to have some type of you call those ex ante schemes, right? Where you get paid to live in a certain area. Just like you get paid to live in a marginal mountain community, you could receive a little bit of extra benefit for living in an area with wolves. I think there's been one example that got scrapped pretty quickly. So it's not something there was no research from it or any results that I have seen. But it's not very progressive so far, the policy in Spain, I would say, from my perspective. And there's a lot of work left to kind of look at the communities where it's working, which is part of the reason why I've really tried to emphasize this first case study where it is working, to funnel some of the resources over there, because it's quite focused on lighting out fires at the moment, the policy, and the tools for lighting out the fires have been compensation and promoting livestock guardian dogs and fences and such things, which isn't really helpful in many cases, because a lot of the time people feel these measures don't work, or they simply don't want wolves or whatever. So conflicts are still kind of happening because of this. And I would say what is needed is to treat the issue or benefit of the wolves as just a tiny part of a general scheme to improve livelihoods in rural communities, right? Because there are so many things going on here. There's climate change, there's depopulation, there is marginalization, and the wolf is a tiny part of this, which might be very important for some stakeholders. But if we could improve the general livelihood, well, the how easy or hard it is to live on the countryside and produce this high kind of quality products that we all want to eat and we all want to support. And a part of that is also supporting people to live with large carnivores and other animals. I think it's much more, I think it's the only approach really We cannot make the solution and the problem all about the wolves. It has to be a broad kind of approach to solving it, which is complicated because that means that you must join many different types of department within government, many different types of research together in one project. And we're all kind of siloed, aren't we? We like hanging out amongst ourselves and have our own perspectives, and it's complicated to work together sometimes, right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, just a lot of what you're saying mirrors a lot of the issues that happen here in North America, I think too. And it's more, it seems more positive than negative, at least in Spain at the moment, and possibly across Europe. But it's just very striking for me to hear, and I heard this a little bit with Barbara and Vicente, that there is a mirroring effect going on with what's happening here. Probably not as, it's not as violent or in terms of to the wolf aspect, at least in North America, as it is in Europe. But these social constructs that you've laid out, as you said, they're complicated. There's really no other word to use other than the fact that there's so many different levels to go through. And like you said, through bureaucracies and governments to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard on an equal level. And that's so tough, especially when you're going in there trying to figure out solutions. And to find solutions, like you said, we need to work together and have everyone's voice in this argument or in this issue so that it's a well-rounded solution. Otherwise, like you say, it's just going to be a solution from, say, government and research, and that leaves out rural communities and their thoughts and how they feel. Do you, and apologies if I missed it, is there, well, let me ask it this way. Have you seen in your conversations and your research that the communities are finding that the governments there in Europe aren't listening to them and therefore have a skewed view of how they want to approach this coexistence model? Or do they seem to be in lockstep with each other?
I think I know there is a very significant problem with distrust in managing communities and governing authorities in general. And this is the case in Sweden, where I'm from. It's the case in Spain, and I would say it's the case all over. So this is the issue that we have to solve. There's a complete lack of trust, and that's because of many reasons. It's not because of just inherently how people are on the countryside. There's a legacy to conservation in many places where, unfortunately, early on, a lot of conservationists, while good intentioned, did push over a lot of people, right? And imposed perhaps their views of what nature should look like and what is good and what is bad. And it has displaced people, and historically, it has wreaked some havoc. Again, there's been good intentions, but we have to learn from those mistakes, but also understand that that legacy is something we have to deal with, right? And today, I think that there's still a little bit of a tendency to treat the wolf problem as an animal problem, and animal problems are solved by biologists and ecologists. And at least something that I have noticed is that if you look at, for example, wolf panels that is helping the government to make decisions about wolves, they're often kind of dominated by natural scientists. And I, adore and respect natural scientists and give them, all the thumbs ups and all the credit. But this really needs to be an interdisciplinary work. And we need more kind of human dimensions people up there because, as I said, this is a very complex and social ecological kind of system that we are dealing with. So if we only look at the conservation status of the wolf, for example, and what the wolf needs to live somewhere, which is actually not that much. We know now they're very flexible. But I guess this is to say that there's still in many places seems to be a priority on the wolf, or at least this is what people perceive. And I saw this a lot in my research, that people feel that the wolf has so much more protection and benefits and people guarding its back than I do. And they feel unfairly treated, right? And they feel that they have nowhere to turn, nobody will help them. Whereas the wolf, this animal that is actually not threatened in Spain at all, whereas the farmers and the communities are depopulating and disappearing at an alarming rate, right? So there's an unfairness there, which is not necessarily the wolf's fault, right? But there's an unfairness there, and a lack of support of them that's making this, in comparison with the support that the wolf have. Yeah, it's a difficult pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Of course. You have like economic and ecological issues that you're trying to tackle in your research, that they really coincide together. Do you see that from Sweden, where you're from? What are some of the differences that you're seeing? Because you mentioned earlier that it's a few hundred wolves in Sweden as opposed to a few thousand in Spain. So why is there such a different, I guess, viewpoint of wolves across Europe? And I don't know, how it goes in Italy or France or the UK, but if this is something that we're seeing, like you say, this repopulating, or it's happening already, and it might take a long time, but it's starting to spread across Europe. Why the different management styles, and why is there this? Seems as though that there's more of a management in Sweden as opposed to a roaming coexistence in Spain.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting topic, and this is not completely true, but just as a generalization, I would say that historically, at least, there's been a negative correlation between the more money a country has, the more resources, the less wildlife they have tended to have, right? So conservation, large carnivores particularly, have been outsourced to poorer countries, because poorer countries have perhaps had less of an ability to get organized and get rid of them. You have to remember that large carnivores used to be, and it's Teddy Roosevelt who quoted, or who said these words, they used to be the beasts of waste and desolation, right? They used to be an indication of you not cleaning up your area, not protecting your people, not protecting your livestock, right? There was a pest to get rid of. And that legacy, it's people in Spain, people living today in Spain that are a bit older now, their parents got paid to kill wolves. We have to keep in mind that this shift has happened very rapidly. But so coming back to Sweden, we were very efficient at getting rid of our wolves. We got rid of all of them, right? And Spain didn't manage to do that, or, we don't exactly know how and why wolves survived, but they did. And they survived in the east of Europe, in poorer countries, towards Russia and Belarus and Ukraine and such places. And they have spread from there. And I think that it's our turn, the richer countries, to pull some weight. You can argue for and against why we should have wolves everywhere, but I think that we have a responsibility as richer nations to take a bigger part of that burden, if you will, of conservation. So in Sweden now, we are committed to having wolves, but we started from zero. We managed to extinguish all of our wolves, and they have slowly increased in the last decades. And now we're at a level that the Swedish Environment Agency determines to be, I think the minimum they have established is 300 wolves for the population to be viable, right? And right now we are 50 or so over that. And it was basically a compromise where we wanted to have wolves, but not too many to make it problematic, because at the same time we want to make sure that the livestock owners and especially dog owners, our biggest problem in Sweden is a lot of the time its impact on hunting, the culture and tradition of hunting. So hunting dogs are killed when they're running after game, because wolves are not very tolerant of dogs, which is of course very traumatic for the hunter. And we have a big hunting community in Sweden. So it's interesting that you will see more stakeholders, more voices, anti-wolf voices from the hunting community than the farming community in Sweden, I would say. Whereas in Spain, those people fighting to limit wolves are usually more from the farming sector. We don't have much free roaming livestock in Sweden, which also, of course, is a factor. So yeah, and on top of that, we have a traditional and indigenous community in the north, the Sami, and it's a population that expands they're in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And I'm sure your listeners, I hope they might be aware that it's a reindeer herding or semi-nomadic people who have semi-domesticated reindeers, and you can't protect them. It's impossible to protect a reindeer. It's not a domestic creature, and it roams across big, vast areas. You can't have livestock guardian dogs or anything to protect them. So wolves do wreak havoc in reindeer territory. So Sweden's decision has been to try to limit wolves there. There's a tolerance level that's been established that reindeer herders shouldn't have to tolerate more than a 10% disappearance or reduction rates
depredation
due to
right.
Depredation. Thank you. That's not the case. It's more in many places, more depredation than that. But there's a part of Sweden, you can see it on the distribution map, where it looks much less wolf dense in an area of Sweden where you would think that there's no people there. Why is there less wolves up there? It's because of the management to try to limit them in that area. So yeah, that's kind of Sweden's approach. So, and the governance system is very different in Sweden and Spain. That's definitely the case. I've struggled a lot to understand, and I'm still not sure that I completely understand the Spanish governance system, because it's decentralized and there's so many authority parts of different departments and who's managing or whatever. But every country is doing different things, I would say. Sorry.
Yeah, no, what I gather from this, and it must be, in a way, this must be difficult, but also exciting for you, because the biodiversity and the social science aspect of it. Again, you're dealing with not just the community aspect, the governmental aspect, and the bureaucracy aspect across, Spain for now, and I'm sure it will expand as I'm sure you make your way across Europe, because this seems as though these are issues that are going to keep cropping up, and making sure that, how are we going to deal with things, like you say, in different countries in the north, in the Finlands and Denmarks and Russias, as opposed to where Spain is, and all these other things. It's going to be a long haul. And I think the basis of your study is huge, because it hopefully will develop a blueprint of some sort. I assume that's what you're looking for, right? Is to try and establish this blueprint of, we see these communities it's working in, how can we help to guide these other communities moving forward, about if this starts to happen, these are the measures that we'll have in place, whether it be monetary gains or coexistence measures and things like that. I mean, is that your ultimate goal with the research, is to make sure that this can be implemented across Europe in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I mean, a blueprint is always, I think people often laugh at social scientists and anthropologists and such, because our most frequent conclusion is, well, it depends, or it's complex, which is not very helpful, is it? But it's true, unfortunately. But perhaps I can get to a blueprint eventually, but it won't be a blueprint of what to do, but potentially how to work with communities to find it out. That's what I'm hoping to kind of establish, right? So when we find out that for example, wolves will come back to a community, or there are problems related to wolves in a community. What can we do with people to figure out the solutions, and a type of solution, or many solutions that are accepted, legitimate, locally relevant? They will look very differently in all these different places, but maybe there's an approach of how you can build trust in these different communities, build kind of bottom-up mechanisms to inform regional authorities or even national authorities of what is needed. How can we help these communities adapt? How can we help these communities to maintain livelihoods under changing global conditions? I guess this is where my background in global studies comes in, right? As you will have noticed, I pull this up to a global level, but you can, right? You can go really nerdy and niche and look at wolves in a small community, but you can take this up to a global problem of unequal distribution of wealth, if you want, right? So this is what we're dealing 100%. With from my point of view. How can we use wolves as a vehicle for positive change? This is essentially what I'm trying to do. And hopefully, I can't say I have a magical formula yet, but I'm very committed and interested in this work. And I think if we get a lot of people aboard here, there's so much cool work going on from both natural and social scientists. And if we manage to collaborate and work a little bit better to communicate this work to communities, but also to policymakers, I think a big hurdle right now that I have seen is that it's quite difficult to get. It's actually the most difficult part is not working with communities. The most difficult part is to get authorities, local authorities, regional authorities, to come to the table, to listen, and to be prepared to change. And that's difficult. From a European level, for example, there are various platforms and initiatives, really good research, really good stuff going on. And on a local level as well, I work with, for example, a national conflict transformation initiative that has local stakeholders coming to really good, productive consensus across both in nature NGOs and farmers and stuff, but it's not being implemented. So that's a really big problem. How can we implement these solutions that people on the local level are saying, we need this to survive, we need this to deal with the wolves. And if we keep doing this type of work with communities, coming to solutions, and they never become implemented, then we have a big problem with credibility, and people will get fatigued. So this is something that I'm very committed to as researchers, as biologists, as everyone really. We have to work more with getting these solutions realized, or at least, communicating very clearly back to the communities what is going on, why it isn't working, what are the hurdles in the way, because otherwise people will just not bother anymore. And I think that's already happened in many places where people say, oh, here's another researcher coming to ask us about this, for the gazillionth time, and nothing ever happens.
And you're starting from square one all over again. And that's, is there anything that you see that from your own perspective that would be able to marry the communities along with the governmental side? Or is it really just, do there need to be, changes in, who's at the top? Is it simply trying to find different voices? What do you think overall, if you can even encapsulate that, is the main deterrent for these things not getting pushed forward into production, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I should be fair on authorities and governing institutions as well, because they have laws and regulations to follow, and the landscape is very difficult for them, right? Because there's so many priorities at the same time that they have to deal with, and perhaps limited resources and so on and so forth. But at least on a Spanish level, I have noticed a big reluctance from many on kind of the authority or the governance side to engage with local communities, because it will make things more complicated. It will change the approaches, and it would, really require some big overhauls. And that's on a short-term political thing, or political kind of landscape where you have to win the next election. It's not been very viable. So again, how far do we want to take this, right? Because this becomes a problem of how politics works and so on. But there are some kind of initiatives to create platforms where regional authorities have, various stakeholders as a council or whatever. But so far, I would say that they're more kind of informative, that rather than actually this council of people having an effect of what is actually happening. So in Picos de Europa, the second place where I was working, there was such a council, or such a roundtable of stakeholders informing and being informed by the regional authorities. But at least some of the people on this roundtable felt that we are coming to consensus and giving them proposals, but they're not being heard, or they're not being realized. So how to overcome that, I don't have the answer yet. Right. But that's really what we have to crack. And I think this is where social scientists working on governance should really come in and work with both the authorities and natural scientists and everyone else to see how can we do this. It would be really cool to have an experiment of some sort somewhere where we really have to kind of realize the proposals that are being brought to the table, because I think that really could make a difference. Yeah,
I agree 100%. I want to ask you, because you spoke about, and what I found interesting, and I saved it towards the end here, is you spoke about nature, just the word nature, a lot through this, and people's different perceptions of what that word means, and what do people visually think of as nature. For you, what do you think nature should look like if you had your crystal ball and you had your optimum outcome? What do you think it should look like?
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot, right? Because being working on the issues that I am working on, I come across people's perceptions all the time, and there's a concept called shifting baseline syndrome, in which you tend to have the way the nature look when you grow up, and the way it looked when your parents and grandparents grew up. That's what nature is to us, no matter how it looked like 50 years ago or 100 years ago, or even before people came about and started killing all the megafauna, right? So at what point, at what baseline is nature natural? We can't say, because nature changes all the time. So what should nature look like to me? Well, I'm a rather forward-looking person when it comes to nature, because we're in the midst of climate change as well. So this means that nature will keep changing faster. And there's a lot of people on planet Earth, and we have to share space with these creatures that also are on this planet. And I hope, and I strive towards a vision of nature where there's definitely more space for wildlife, for biodiversity, than there is now. I mean, if we weigh all the mammals on this planet, most of them are people and livestock. And that's perhaps rather unfortunate, right? I think wildlife at the moment, if you just weigh the biomass of mammals, is about 4%. That's not right. That's not how it should be. And I think 30-something% is people, and around 60% is livestock. Right? And there's a lot of livestock in the wrong place. We need livestock. Livestock can be extremely beneficial in many places, because we people killed off all the megafauna, all these big grazers that used to roam the earth. And in some places, they conveniently were replaced by domestic livestock. So in Spain, for example, domestic livestock in the mountain areas where I've been working are very, very important, because they're the only ones maintaining these amazingly biodiverse grasslands. And if these animals, if the grazers, the livestock disappear, it will be replaced by much poorer landscapes, constituting mainly of shrub that will burn, oftentimes because it's very flammable, because of climate change, it's warming, so on and so forth, right? So coming back to your question, what should nature look like? I think we should try to squeeze in as much biodiversity as possible everywhere, right? So rewilding, I don't even know if that is rewilding. If we should use the re before the wilding, we should just wild as much as possible.
Wild.
Because looking back, we can look back for inspiration, but I don't think we should look back to get a blueprint or what it should look like, because it's kind of, things will keep changing all the time. That's what nature does. It evolves, it changes. That is the state of nature. The only thing that is certain is change, right?
Wow.
But we have to do so in a way that works for people, right? It will unfortunately be very messy, because the more wildlife we have, I mean, you would know this from the US, where bears come in and they eat from the trash. And like, this is what we are facing in Europe now. This is why it's becoming so difficult. It was much simpler to just banish wildlife to wilderness areas and national parks. It's way more simple, but it's not necessarily conducive to a sustainable life on this planet, at least not one which we all want, right? With stable, biodiverse nature. So I hope we can build kind of a future where we find good ways to govern and continuously solve this mess that it will be to have both people and wildlife in the same place. And it will require us to be quite pragmatic, and it will look very different everywhere. I mean, some places will maybe just be full of all these new species that have come in because climate change or just because invasives, whatever. And other places we would try to restore as much as possible to some former state of being and whatever. But I definitely see nature including people in most places, because people have been absolutely everywhere on this planet and shaped it in so many ways and forms that there's no going back. So yeah, this is a very flowery answer. Yeah, I mean, there's so many exciting kind of prospects of what we could do if we manage to find legitimacy for how we govern it, right? If we can get people excited about what our lives in the future could look like with more wild spaces and more wildlife, and if we can find the empathy within ourselves to be honest and clear and see that it's going to be problematic for many people. So how can we resolve those issues along the way?
Wow. You said so many powerful words, empathy and wilding, and your positive outlook and what you're saying, I believe it. And I believe those things can be done. And I, as you said, we are all over this planet, meaning human beings. And so hopefully, as you stated, we can come to a social medium or a social, in the middle, where we can understand that we can live with all of these creatures again, and that we did it before. And now it may be, like you said, it's going to be complicated. It's going to be messy. A lot of the things that we do are not, easy or straightforward, but these are issues that we can tackle as a society globally. And you're right. I think to bring that in, to understand that, and it's tough, I think, for people to see that we are part of a global system, as opposed to just my town or my city in my state that's large, in my country that's large. And so it's looking at it in such a broad matter. I mean, you paint everything you've said is painting with a broad brush, and it's so difficult to get into a finite topic. And you've done that wonderfully with your research already in these communities in Spain. And I'm hoping to hear more from you in the future about places, hopefully in your home country in Sweden, or if you go to Italy or any of these other places where you're going to make this impact. So I'm hopeful to hear more from you in the future about how this moves forward, for sure. Absolutely.
Oh, thanks, Sean. I mean, I appreciate it a lot. And yeah, there's so many inspiring examples out there. What I'm doing in my research, which is a very conscious choice, right? Because it's very easy to get depressed by the current state of being, especially if you work in biodiversity, right? But we have to focus our attention on what is working. I really do believe that hope is such a powerful vehicle for change. We all want hope, and there is a lot of hope out there. People are truly a very amazing, empathetic species too. I mean, there's the dark side and the light side. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of inspiration to find if we just start looking for it and amplify it. So that's what I want to do in my research, and anybody should join me really, and we can try to build from that.
Yeah. Hanna's recruiting, just in case you're
wondering. So. Come over to the hopeful side. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Sometimes I now sound like a very optimistic, like I definitely have my moments of doubt and despair. But yeah, I mean, whatever floats your boat and enables you to carry on doing a work that you care about. It's not to say that we shouldn't focus on the problems and try to solve those as well.
Yeah, we need to. I have two more things. One question, then I want to promote where your papers are and social media, anywhere that you are, so that people can reach you. But my last question for you, as I ask everyone, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Oh, it is, to me, it's just, the wolf is a symbol, right? Poor wolves, we have put so much on their backs, but it's such an amazing species, and they're amazingly flexible, not only in their, ecologically speaking, they're a generalist species, but they're also a generalist in our mind. So whatever you want to make the wolf out to be, like a friend related to the dog, our defender, our protector, right? Our playful playmate. You can find the traits in the wolf that can confirm that belief, but you can find the traits that will make it out as a murderer and as a thief. And ever since Yellowstone, you can also find the traits in the wolf that will make it out as our savior. The wolf will change rivers and all that stuff. And people just take whatever interpretation they favor or where they come from, how they experience the wolf, and they run with it. And you can find the facts that confirm your view. And all the while, the wolves are out there trying to mind their own business and surviving, right? And if they only knew what we are making them out to be, right? They're an animal just like most other animals on this planet. So sometimes I feel bad for them because, gee, boss, it's a heavy backpack that they have to carry, poor things.
Wow. That is, you're right. You're right.
What was the second question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it wasn't even a question. Just, I'm hearing I'm just listening back to your answer, and it's so a heavy backpack. That's very, very symbolic, as you said. Yeah. That's a huge symbol, and you're correct. Just tell everybody where they can. I don't know if your papers are already published or they're in the works, but where can people find out about the research that you're doing? Any websites or social media? I don't know if you're on Twitter, Instagram, things like that, where people can follow along on this journey that you're on right now.
Yeah, I mean, two papers are published already, and the easiest way to find me, I think, is if you just Google Hanna Pettersson, my name, and Leeds University, and you will end up on my university page or my ResearchGate page, and you can find all the publications there. I've tried to engage with, do popular sciencey stuff. So there's a conversation article, for example, that talks a little bit, gives a summary of my work in Spain and a little example of the people I've been working with. So just tap in there. You can find me on Twitter as well. It's Hanna P3TT, I think my name is, where I sometimes very sporadically put things that I have done or published. And there will be a third paper and perhaps a fourth coming out within the project, hopefully before I finish. And then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone who's listening, I will have the links to Hanna's papers in the description, but this way you guys can look at them, read them. This is really important work that she's doing. And again, on a global scale, it's a massive undertaking. So as she said before, if you're interested and you want to get your hands dirty and really get involved, who knows, maybe she's taking interns or whatever she's doing to get help on her end. But Hanna, lovely to meet you finally, and kudos to you with all the work that you're doing. And please, you're welcome back at any point. If there's a new study that you're working on, a new country that you're in, open invitation to come back, share with myself. Maybe Stephen can join the next one and just keep us up to date as to how these things are doing and how we can get the word out too for you as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to talk to you. Always happy to hang out with fellow nerds.
Absolutely. How's to all of you out there, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everyone. Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.